Hi, welcome. My name is Kenny Johnston. I'm the Director of Product Ops here at GitLab. I'm going to be going over an Ops section overview here with Soumya and William. William and Soumya, why don't you introduce yourselves real quick?
William Chia, Product Marketing.
Hey, this is Soumya. I'm Product Marketing as well.
Awesome. So I wanted to quickly go over kind of what we're going to cover in this conversation. So we're going to cover both what the general overview of the different capabilities in the ops section, which covers the configure and monitor stages are. William and Soumya will cover those. And then I'm going to give a quick overview of some slides with screenshots to different feature capabilities that exist today within the ops section. So again, in the configure and monitor stages, what's available in GitLab right now. And then we'll jump to me giving an overview of where this section is headed. It's a place where we're investing a lot. We have a lot of growth plans for where we want to take the product, this part of the product in the future. So with that, why don't I hand it over to William, who's going to talk about our configures.
Awesome, thanks, Kenny. So just to highlight a little bit about what configure is and who we are targeting with these capabilities. When we talk about configuration management, there are a lot of tools in the market that would fit under the configure part of DevOps. And so when we're talking about configuration, we're really talking about a layer almost above that where we're managing configuration tools. So you can think of this as Kubernetes, folks that are using Kubernetes within GitLab, and we are allowing you to configure your Kubernetes clusters. This involves serverless and infrastructure as code. And the way we're thinking about infrastructure as code is creating, again, a management layer to manage IAC or infrastructure as code tools. And you can think of this as the laying the groundwork for your CI/CD. So a great analogy here is if CI/CD is the plane and you are coming in to land your plane, the configure stage is about the runway. So it's the infrastructure, the environments where you're deploying your code. So with this, we're targeting folks like developers and operations engineers. And what we're not doing is building a configuration tool for things like VMs and bare metal servers. Tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible, Terraform, we're not looking to replace those tools. We're looking to integrate with those tools with our configure stage. And so as such, we're not targeting legacy IT operations teams. In the short term, we're looking at developers, folks who are DevOps engineers, site reliability engineers, these types of modern ways of structuring DevOps and software development teams. And we're looking specifically at cloud native applications and platform teams that are enabling other teams. We're not targeting legacy ops teams. We're not targeting central IT, sysadmins, those types of personas. We are looking at some legacy infrastructure, things like virtual machines, not just Kubernetes, but we are looking at some of what we would call legacy infrastructure, which we mean non-containerized or infrastructure that's not Kubernetes. In a little bit longer term, 2 to 3 years, we are looking to rope in a broader set of personas. We want to displace incumbent monitoring and configuration solutions and have that single application for cloud native and legacy apps. So with that, I'll hand it over to Soumya to share a little bit about Monitor as well. There's some similarities, but also some unique bits there.
Thank you, William. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so when we're talking about monitoring within GitLab, essentially we're talking about monitoring the software that you're developing and deploying using GitLab. It could be your Kubernetes clusters or applications that you are deploying using GitLab itself. Self-monitoring, which so far used to be part of the monitor stage itself, is not going to be part of the monitor stage. It would be moved to the enablement stage as part as of FY21. From a persona point of view, essentially we are targeting the developers and DevOps engineers who are using GitLab as a single application from all the way from creating the code to deploying and monitoring their code in production. It's specifically for developers who are building using cloud native applications. We don't intend to, in the short term, to target the central IT teams, ops teams, and therefore in the short term, we're not looking at being the single consolidator tool set for an operations team, right? In the long term, our goal in the 2 to 3 years time frame, our goal is really to cover cloud native application and platform teams that support those cloud native applications. So in addition to the DevOps engineers and cloud native applications that we spoke about, we would also intend to support the platform teams that are supporting development of such cloud native applications or monitoring applications for those cloud native apps. Who will find value in it today? So as a customer has mentioned to us recently, any new application that we are able to monitor using the GitLab toolset will save them New Relic licenses, right? So all new cloud native technologies is what we want to cover. We also want to cover the applications that are getting deployed as a part of auto DevOps as well. And another quick note is observability was moved to core as a part of our free gift at the end of the year. So in the coming period, Kenny will talk about, from what time frame it will completely move into core, but this has been an announcement that we made recently towards the end of the year. Handing it back to Kenny.
Awesome, thanks, Samia. And yeah, while I share my screen, the observability to core thing is a really important thing for us. It's important that we enable individual developers to have full control over their observability suite, and having our observability system in core means that it's a tool that developers can use deeply ingrained with their existing set of tools, while also being able to contribute back to it, right? It's an open source project. You can improve it in the way that you would improve your application code. So we're really excited about that adjustment. I wanted to briefly go over some of the existing features in the ops section. I'm gonna show some slides that have screenshots and talk through them, but there are also plenty of example projects that GitLab.com is the GitLab team is dogfooding, or some projects that the ops section stage teams use in order to demo the sets of features that we're talking about. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out. We can give you some concrete real world examples. These are all from live GitLab.com projects. The first step in the ops section is really about the attachment of Kubernetes clusters. And so we made an early bet in Kubernetes, and we make the adoption or use of Kubernetes really easy for developers and development teams. You can easily add a cluster from one of the currently 2 major cloud providers. It quickly integrates with their managed Kubernetes services. So you can create a GKE or an AWS cluster. Right there on the side of your project, there's a operations Kubernetes tab. Click on that and you get the ability to quickly create a kind of prescribed cluster. Once you create that cluster, you can install Kubernetes apps using Helm. We have a portfolio of apps today that we think are important to enable you to get the full use out of that cluster and get it and have it be fully integrated. Once you've installed some of those apps, including the one that enables monitor, you can start seeing the health. This is all right within the GitLab application. You can start seeing the CPU and memory usage from within that cluster. And then we subsequently, once we have this information about an attached cluster for your project, or you can also attach them at the group level, you start getting this really rich integration. Your attached cluster immediately becomes available through a set of CI variables or environment variables that you can easily deploy your application to it. When you have an attached cluster, we can use auto DevOps scripts, which perform prescriptive CI jobs that not only test your code, but also deploy it to that cluster in specified environments, creates review apps for you automatically. These are all just with a couple of clicks of a button once you've got a Kubernetes cluster attached to your project. We give you rich environment views, including a view into what pods are deployed into a specific environment. The example in that image here is a group level cluster with multiple projects attached to that same cluster, all with different environments. In this case, there's some production and review apps, but you could imagine multiple staging or production environments per application, all viewable here with the pods that are there. You can quickly drill into pod logs, the specific project's code, the environment state, all from right within GitLab, all because you've attached that cluster and we have it really well integrated. And then lastly, you can even define the cluster's criteria or configuration in code. You can assign a cluster management project that says, this is the descriptive state of the cluster that I'd like to be using, and manage that just like you would any other code. William talked about infrastructure as code and how we don't want to replace those other existing configuration management tools. We almost think of them like languages, right? You can write their language store the description of that language in a repository, and we can manipulate that just like we would any other code. And in this case, we're using it to manage your Kubernetes cluster. The other side that William mentioned was serverless. And so we've had our serverless category available for almost a year now. And we have some great integration where you can quickly get started. There's great templates for getting started. You can define a serverless.yaml file that defines what, in this case, I'm defining functions, where you can define the functions that are to be deployed. You easily install Knative as the service we use primarily to manage serverless apps. We've recently added support for AWS Lambda. You can quickly get started on the kind of functions-based architecture if your teams are creating brand new apps that fit that architecture. And once you've created them, we give you good insight into the number of invocations, the URL, what pods are being deployed for these functions, all again right within GitLab. So these are both examples of more modern technologies that we make really easy to adopt for teams that might not be as familiar with them. In the monitor section, we have panels for dashboards that display metrics. We come with a bunch of out-of-the-box metrics. When you attach a Kubernetes cluster and install the Prometheus monitoring service, metric service, you immediately get a set of dashboards for various both system level and application level metrics that are important to be observing. We give you immediate access to your Kubernetes pod logs, so you can kind of tail the logs coming off your Kubernetes cluster and a specific pod that an application might be running in when trying to troubleshoot. We give you a good view and integration with two other open source projects, Sentry and Jaeger, for error tracking and tracing. And again, in all of those instances, it's not just, oh, we're displaying the information. We're a single application for your DevOps platform. From an operations perspective, that means really rich context being provided throughout that experience. So when you look at an error, you get to see the most recent GitLab commits that might be associated with that error. We can jump you to the file blame on, or the history of a file when you're looking at a stack trace. When you're looking at your ops dashboard, we can show you the alerts for specific applications or projects right there on the dashboard. When you're looking at the various environments, you can quickly jump to the metrics views of that environment to see if that environment is healthy. When you are looking at a chart, just something as simple as a chart, we, because it's a single application, can quickly show you a recent deploy and give you a quick link to the commit that corresponded to that deploy right there in the metric. So if you're troubleshooting why a metric suddenly spiked, you can find that right there. These are all part of not just having the tools for doing observability, but integrating them really well. And then the last one is incident management. And again, this is really about being able to embed rich context. We use GitLab issues for incident management. When you set up alerts, you can have them automatically create issues from a prescribed template. And those templates aren't just content. You can embed information that was generated by the alert and from the alert payload right into the incident template. You can also directly embed charts. So maybe there's a type of incident that you regularly look at a certain chart, maybe a database query chart. Whenever you see an alert of this type, embed that right there. And then we also have the ability to integrate with Zoom. This is an example where there's a quick action for adding a Zoom link to any issue so that you can quickly collaborate in the times where you're firefighting and trying to triage a application issue or performance degradation. You can quickly jump on a call with your team and collaborate. So those are just a handful of the current features within the ops section. As I mentioned, the general theme is we give you the ability to get started with these operations principles quickly as a developer, and then we make it really integrated into the rest of your development experience. With that, I'm going to jump to where we're headed. So that was an overview of where we are. Let's talk about where we're headed. So as mentioned, the ops section is divided into the two stages of configure and monitor. They're at the late stage of the DevOps loop. As a company, we are generally pursuing this market opportunity as today, despite DevOps demanding a tight integration between developer and operations, they can have that tight integration, but they still work with different tools. And so we want to bring them together under the same tool. And increasingly, that's not just taking an old style of working for operators and having them attempt to do it in a more DevOps-friendly fashion. It's about having developers take on more operations tasks. Developers are consistently being asked to perform more tasks that were traditionally in the domain of operators. Think of this as this kind of, as William mentioned, the integrated SRE model. And we're seeing an increase in the kind of power of developers to choose these tools, a skills gap in terms of understanding the operational tasks required, and a kind of clear underlying fabric that we can rely on in Kubernetes and cloud native applications that enable us to, if we can give people smart primitives, as I mentioned, make it easy to adopt some of these new technologies, set up their observability systems really well, then developers are empowered to more quickly move through the DevOps transformation. So we think of these opportunities as critical to informing our long-term strategy, which again is to complete the DevOps loop, be a single application for the developer whose team and organization is responsible for the entire DevOps loop. That's not bimodal IT where they're handing off an application to an operations team, and give them the tools to perform that locally and make it a great experience. So it's not a jumping between different tools that they might have to do today. In the short term, some of our themes include doing all of this on the principles that GitLab is founded, which is that we define things in code. We started with great source control management and then created CI, which you define in code, and source control, just like you would your application. We're doing the same thing with infrastructure and observability. We want to give you as a developer the sense of reliability that comes with knowing that you've defined something in code, in written form, and that is immutable from that point on, and that you can, the only way that is going to change is if you change it with a merge request, right? And so we're going to rely on those same principles as we pursue the operations features that we do. We are working to make sure your alerts are configured as code, that the metrics that you set up, obviously, if you instrument your app are in code, but the metrics that you set up outside on your infrastructure are defined as code, that the infrastructure that you're deploying is defined as code. And then you can use the basic CI primitives that we have to manage any change of state there. We're also really interested in the feedback loop. Now, it's my belief that when we talk about the feedback loop for DevOps, we typically think primarily about the application's performance or availability. But there are so many other characteristics of an application that it's really important that developers get the feedback for. You can think of things like user feedback forums or real user monitoring, places where it's the quicker iteration you get from feedback from real users to developers who can then respond to that feedback, the better. And we're really, by being a single platform, we have an opportunity to make that feedback loop smarter, to ensure that there's great tracking between the two, to ensure that there's not context lost between feedback coming in from one end of the DevOps cycle and then that moving into planning and creating on the other side. And then the last one is one that I've touched on a couple of times, which is operations for all. We understand that there is a skills gap for people with operational knowledge, and we want to make it as easy as possible. We think that the tools available today give IT organizations, development organizations, an opportunity to quickly adopt some of these patterns and mean that they don't have to be operational experts in order to operate large-scale applications. And so we want to keep in mind that we're not building a tool for the person who's been doing operations for 20 years and is deeply ingrained in it. We're building a tool for the developer who's getting started and needs to operate infrastructure while also doing their day job of writing new application code and features. And so that's a really important distinction in our approach to it. We are here to make it easier and get started. It aligns well with GitLab's value of convention over configuration. We want to make sure things work well out of the box, that they work for the new user, for the millions of people who are coming to cloud native and coming to Kubernetes and coming to DevOps today. And so it's important that we make that really easy. And the last one is there's a general theme that people say kind of pejoratively, this no ops theme, but there are going to continue to be abstractions away from infrastructure so that people have to think less and less even about Kubernetes, which helps you not have to think about servers and where your application is running. And so things like serverless and other paradigms will come up where they enable developers to think even less about infrastructure. Kubernetes and our approach to Kubernetes already does a lot of that. If you've set up a Kubernetes cluster, you don't have to think if you set up a group level Kubernetes cluster, your developers don't have to think too much about where their application is landing. They get a lot of rich context about how it's performing, but don't think too much about the infrastructure. But there will continue to be more and more layers of abstraction that we want to make sure we're supporting the kind of available architectures for developers. So what does that mean for our one-year plan? You know, at GitLab, we have a high focus on dogfooding. We will continue to focus on dogfooding throughout this year, ensuring that our own operations teams are using these tools. We've started to do some early pilot projects for doing so, but we think that dogfooding is one of the primary ways that we're going to increase our rate of iteration, which is really obviously important to GitLab. It's one of our core values. Logging, we're focusing on getting our logging features to viable. We want to build the kind of dashboarding, and less dashboarding for looking at something in a NOC style view, but more dashboarding for if you're doing exploration, right? The dashboards are valuable for when triaging an issue, you need to explore and get a sense of what actually is going on. We'll continue to focus on incident management, IAC, enterprise level Kubernetes management, and serverless. So those are the things that we are focusing on. The things that we're not focusing on is, you know, we are recognizing that there is a movement in the industry towards more platform teams. I talked about if you had a group level Kubernetes cluster, that gets your individual developers out of the whole notion of managing Kubernetes or attaching a Kubernetes cluster to their individual project. We're clearly seeing that as a trend from our users and from the industry. And so we want to focus more of our support on Kubernetes about managing a cluster that supports multiple projects and multiple users rather than the individual, I'm attaching a kind of individual Kubernetes cluster just for my singular project. And then we're not going to be as heavily invested in these kind of out-of-the-box monitoring configurations for your system-level metrics. We really want to focus our monitoring and metrics capabilities on the business-level metrics that impact developers, users, and waking them up at night for those types of metrics. That also includes kind of the in-app instrumentation of your code with a bunch of different legacy programming languages. We're talking about cloud-native developers, so we are focusing on more modern programming languages as a result. So that is an overview of the stage, our kind of thematic viewpoint on it, our one-year plan, and also kind of what we are and are not planning on working on during that one-year plan. I hope that that is informative. I look forward to any and all feedback about our plan. Obviously, everything at GitLab is a work in progress, so I would appreciate any contribution and feedback. I'm excited about where GitLab is headed in our ops section in 2020. It's going to be an awesome year for continuing to evolve our set of features and solving more and more customer pain points as a result. And I look forward to hearing more from you all. Thank you.